Cancer is something that everyone, no matter what age you are, will have to deal with in one way or another in a lifespan. No matter who you are as a child or an adult, cancer is something that you will touch. It will become part of you at one moment or another. Not necessarily, I'm not saying you're necessarily going to get cancer. I'm saying that most likely someone close to you will get it. You will know someone who will have died, or you will know someone who's had to have chemotherapy and or radiation or a mastectomy, anything.
What are cancer's biggest issues? As we saw in episode 1, funding is a major one. But to resolve the funding issue, we must build awareness and create political will. The question is, do our politicians care enough about cancer? How about researchers? Do they care enough to collaborate? Or are they busy fighting for funds? In this, the second episode of Cancer Is, we will also look at issues facing patients directly, including screening, treatment, and palliation. Too many enter their final days in agony, and often alone. This is now true in developing nations as well. Cancer clearly knows no cultural, geographic, or socioeconomic barriers. As many nations develop economically, they are inheriting many of the cancers associated with highest income nations. Lung cancer, for instance. Indeed, lung cancer is now the world's leading cause of cancer death. And without intervention, tobacco could kill 1 billion people this century. Do we have the will to stop this trend? The political will? Let's find out.
So everything happened to you in 1 week. I mean, you went from Soleil normal to Soleil cancer patient in 1 week.
Yes.
Did you know what cancer was back then?
No, my mother's best friend had died of cancer years before. For me, it was a cancer of old people. Young people did not get cancer. I didn't have a lot of experience with it. The only people I knew that had it were of the older generation.
Cancer and cancer prevention and control should be on the health agenda of every country, every state, and certainly the G8 agenda, even though it isn't as I speak. You've got tuberculosis, you've got HIV/AIDS, you've got malaria, all important diseases. But cancer kills globally more people than all of those put together.
If you look at the strategies, national health strategies of many countries, especially in Eastern Europe and some of the more middle-income countries, you see that they have put the chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases as priority, and among them cancer. There are some countries like Thailand, for example, it has cancer there on top as a major disease to fight. The donors have not developed the same understanding yet.
There isn't enough attention paid to cancer and other chronic diseases at the present time, both in the high income, but particularly in the low income countries. We've got the low income countries, striving to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, which are wonderful, wonderful. It's galvanized unprecedented levels of activity to help the 1 billion poorest people on the planet. But there's no mention of cancer. There's no mention of other chronic disease in that.
I think that we definitely have to make sure that our politicians, both in the United States and elsewhere, realize that these healthcare issues actually are incredibly important. The one thing that the AIDS activists have done and did very well in the late 1980s, early 1990s is actually get HIV/AIDS on everybody's agenda, make the politicians realize this is a concern of the populace. We need to do the exact same thing with chronic diseases such as cancer.
It's too big a problem to ignore. It is too big and too frightening a problem. It is a pandemic, and it cannot be ignored anymore. This is going to far outweigh many of these communicable diseases. And until we have strategies to deal with cancer, our lifespan could go backwards. I'm not angry at any of the organizations that do not currently engage in cancer promotion or understanding. I am more concerned about the people who do not apply pressure on them to do so. Large agencies of government are not creative. They only implement, and sometimes badly. Sometimes they do a good job implementing. But They will only change direction in the middle of a great sea. If you look at it, each of these organizations is a great ship, and they turn in a wide arc. They don't turn suddenly. And they only turn when the currents are so strong that they need to turn.
Funding for cancer services specifically, or medical services, health services in general, is still very little. You're talking about $10 or so per person per year.
I'm always impressed when I go to the United States and I see the tremendous enthusiasm of some charities to raise funds and to raise millions of dollars. In the UK also there is this cultural tradition. It's not the case, I'm afraid, in other European countries where this culture doesn't exist to the same extent and where it's a constant battle to get funding.
The great tragedy in the US right now is that the funding is level at a time when we're making great advances, and so people are going different routes. And so I think the money needs to go into bringing in, recruiting the new talent into the fields and retaining them. Because when funding levels out and the field is growing, the people who are already successful get funded, the newcomers don't. And so they leave the field.
Every year we organize different activities to get funds to do our job, because here come many people that don't have money to buy their medicines.
Famous restaurants in Brussels offer a table of for 10 persons one evening, and we sell the tables 2,500 euros. And the donors don't know in which restaurant they will go that evening. So the evening starts with a reception in the city hall, and during this reception the mayor draw the tables, and it's only at that moment that the donors know in which restaurant they will go that evening.
Because I've treated so many people in the country, I'm often in a position of asking them for support in terms of philanthropy to the cancer cause, and have been reasonably successful in that.
A patient of mine who had cancer 12 years ago, and she's now cured and she's thankful. So one day we were talking, and I said, I would love to be able to build a center in Val-d'Hebron that would take care only of patients with breast cancer. That would be nice, that would be a place that people would feel well treated, and that would be wonderful. And she said, what were you thinking about? Well, I'm thinking about, an important center. And I said, well, how much would that cost? He said, well, it's going to cost this. I said, okay, I'm going to help you. And I said, well, and I said, sure, and what do you mean you're going to help me? He said, I'm going to pay for it. So this center is paid in full.
A couple of years ago, a very generous Australian by the name of Mr. Greg Poach came to understand what the importance of melanoma to Australian society was. And so after various discussions and some considering a variety of options, he has committed and some $40 million to help us develop a new centre which will provide all those things in one building.
So one man is funding 40 million Australian dollars to one cancer unit.
It is a very important contribution. It's the largest gift by an individual to a single cause in Australian history.
I think increasingly I feel part of a global cancer community, in that none of us in isolation can conquer cancer working on our own. So from Oxford, we've reached out to collaborators in many other parts of the world. We have very strong collaboration.